So this is part 2 to the HP 1.5 GHz 4-channel oscilloscope, and the problem I was having was I was trying to clone the original drive originally in the first video, and I brought a new old stock 20 gig hard drive that I was going to use in this thing, and the problem was I could not get it to boot no matter how many times I clone. I used Clonezilla, I used other software that I was originally using to clone it, and every time I would get an invalid disk and stuff like that, where I finally figured it out. And what it was due to was there was actually bad blocks on this original hard drive. So when it was cloning it, it wasn't cloning it exactly correctly, because normally the software I used to clone it clones it fine and stuff. So what I ended up having to do was I had to run a check disk on that, fix those bad blocks essentially and stuff like that. Once I did that and stuff like that, I F-disked the new 20 gig hard drive in an older XP machine that I had laying around and stuff like that. So I actually created a startup disk, F-disk, formatted it. Then I went ahead and took that hard drive, put it into my cloning machine essentially and stuff like that, and I did a bit by bit recovery instead like that. So when it redeleted the partition, it did a bit-by-bit recovery instead of doing a quick recovery. By doing that, then it set the drive as active and stuff. I went ahead and put it in the oscilloscope, and it booted right up with no problems whatsoever. So, yeah, it was kind of an error on my part, because I remembered that, hard drives are failing. You don't want to go ahead and actually, do. So I'm kind of glad, too. Not only that, too, I also made an image of that backup, too, as well, so I can use it for future down the road. Now I do have the software for this. The problem with it is, though, is as you can see, I got IDE cables kind of just hanging around and stuff, because I tried to use an IDE CD-ROM drive that I had laying around. Unfortunately, it's not supported with this. You need a really old CD-ROM drive, I guess, to be able to use it and stuff like that. It says adaptive incompatible when I tried a couple different ones, which I got. You can see over there, I got a pile of them. Because originally what I was going to do was just do a clean install and stuff like that. I even went ahead and took this out. I was going to use a laptop drive to do it, because it has the same connector as this floppy optical drive and stuff like that. And I was just going to do a bit-by-bit recovery. Now, I actually do got the LS120 image as well, too, for this. But the problem is I don't have a USB version of one of these to be able to actually create the backup and stuff. I was simply trying, you can see over there, burn this, of course, image onto a CDR and stuff like that. I was just going to use a CD drive and reload it, but that didn't kind of go over too well, because every time I tried to do that, like I said, I would get that Adaptec incompatibility issue. It won't work with newer drivers, essentially. So I ended up having to repair that drive, essentially, and stuff like that. Once I repaired that drive, then I was able to actually go ahead and put it onto the new 20 gig hard drive, and it booted right up with no issues whatsoever. So that's what it is. Always make sure when you're doing a clone of a drive that you repair any issues with the original drive first, and then set it to do bit by bit recovery instead of doing it the fast way, because the fast way tends to corrupt some of the data and stuff. And when you do bit by bit, it recovers everything exactly how it is on that drive, and that's exactly the method I did. And yep, I got a working hard drive in the scope now, so I'm going to go ahead and clean up this mess that I have going on right now and stuff like that, and get this thing fully back together, I guess. So this HP 1.5 GHz 4-channel oscilloscope's pretty much repaired. Finally was able to get the new old stock 20 gig hard drive that I had probably for many years. It was sitting in the box for years. Was able to use it and get the failing hard drive that I was in out pretty much, so it's one less thing now I have to worry about it. And like I said before, the original problem was when I tried to clone it originally, I tried to do a fast clone on it, and I guess that caused even more corruption of the data. And no matter what I would set the bias size, because I even tried to set the bias to detect the size of the original drive, it just would not boot off that drive, even if after I made that partition active and so forth. So turns out that there was actually bad blocks and bad sectors on that drive, so I went ahead and fixed that. Once I fixed it, I just did a bit by bit recovery, and then I was able just to dropped the new drive in there and it booted on first attempt without even having to change angle settings and stuff. So it was a success, and thankfully now I got an actually good image of what was on the original drive. So that's a good thing. It's one less thing I gotta worry about. So this hard drive fails, I can go ahead and just replace it and it won't be a problem. Now I know a lot of people are saying, why not just put an SSD in there and be done with it? Well, I don't like typically doing that if it's an older machine, like especially a Windows 95 or 98 machine or Windows 2000 XP machine, because it doesn't support trim. And the problem with that is over time the SSD will fill up, and when it fills up it'll slow it down to pretty much nothing, and then now I will do it if I can't find, let's say, a replacement drive, or I'll just use a compact flash adapter to IDE and so forth and use that, because this scope doesn't really need a large drive for it. You can get away with using a 4 GB compact flash card and you'll be fine as well too. But if I can find a new old stock drive similar to what was in there, I'll use that instead. I don't want to go ahead and just put an SSD on everything pretty much. And then likely the hard drive is probably going to be more reliable and last longer than most older SSDs anyway. So I just went ahead and did that, and hopefully she'll last a few years before I have to redo it again. And thankfully it still passes our self-test and calibration and so forth, and the scope did work before, so it wasn't an issue before anyway. As you can see there, I ran it a few minutes ago and she is still working, so that's a good thing. So the only thing left that I have to do to this thing, and I'm not sure you can hear it or not, but you don't hear that grinding sound no more. That's because I replaced the CPU fan as well, and I ended up finding one that was a ball bearing fan, and that's what I threw in it. And I also went ahead and replaced the NVRAM battery. Even though the guy changed it out, I went ahead and just purchased a new one and put that in there. So the only thing left that I have to wait for is I still have to wait for the battery, which I ordered through DigiKey, which is the one for the acquisition card, and I was able to find the exact battery through DigiKey with the terminals and everything on there. So I'll do a separate video on that, because you want to do those while they're hot, at least you can follow this procedure with any oscilloscope that happens to hold the calibration data, where you can keep 3 volts at another point on there, and you just kind of follow the traces, solder a bodge wire of course to it, and then you use your external power supply to keep 3 volts on the board, and then you can safely desolder that battery and then drop the new battery in there. And once you're done, then you can disconnect the external power supply and drop the card back in there, and 9 times out of 10 it'll still retain the data. And I haven't really actually had one that I lost the data unless the battery itself was already bad, of course. But I'm going to go and do that once the battery comes in, and hopefully this oscilloscope will be pretty reliable.